Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sumita, Kareer, and you're watching Startup Central. If it's technology, startups, emerging businesses, and the new economy, if those sectors interest you, well, then this is the show that you should be watching weekdays at 6 p.m. to keep a track of all the developments in this space, because we are telling the story of India's entrepreneurial ecosystem like nobody else, and how that building in India story is shaping up on a daily basis. And since, ladies and gentlemen, we thrive on constructive feedback, do share your thoughts with us on the show and what you'd like to watch on the show at suc@etnow.tv. And on that note, let's get started with the show and take a look at what's coming up. Well, we'll go to all of those. We'll go to the big ticket stories in just a bit, but let's take a focused look at what's coming up on the show. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is part 3 of our budget special programming on Startup Central. And what the wish list of the VC and the startup ecosystem is, and of course to decode the budget wish list, I now have Ashish Fafadia, the managing partner of Blume Ventures, now joining us. Ashish, thank you very much for joining us here on ET Now. Appreciate you taking the time out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me over, Sumita.
Ashish, so last year the big theme around budget was continuity, because there were elections. So there was, of course, an interim budget, then the full budget. However, this time around, there is a slew of factors that seem to be in focus as far as the budget is concerned, and that are going to have an impact on how the budget is presented and what the announcements are likely going to be like. Number one is a slowing growth of the Indian economy, the consumption slowdown, and of course the Trump factor that is likely to have an impact on global economy once the tariff policy is really out. Given that backdrop in mind, what are your key asks of the finance minister, and how do you think the finance minister is going to be presenting this year's budget, keeping that background in the picture?
So, Sumita, I think the finance minister is largely going to try and make sure that some of the good work that had happened in the past 2 or 3 budgets, where they had come with the whole framework around Saptarshi, they had tried to come the framework of Viksit Bharat and the whole goal towards a certain yardsticks on evaluating our own security on whether it's not just about the conventional areas around food, etc., but power, defense. I do feel that there will be a clear-cut messaging that we are serious about it, regardless of what happens around the global policy and the Trump manifestations around the way they are going to look at tariffs, etc. The government is going to be very conscious. I do believe that they will go with a full thrust on giving impetus to primary inflows into setting up our own manufacturing, giving a shot in the arm for the technology area and creating our individual and independent IP framework through AI and our own LLMs. So there are going to be multi-pronged agenda, and I do feel that the government will be driving through some of these factors to make it much more self-reliant and insulate ourselves from global shock, because a fair bit of our economy still focuses on domestic consumption, and there is going to be an opportunity miss if you're not going to be looking in a balance of inward and outward rather than just be worried about the external factors.
Absolutely, Ashish, because we've for the longest time stated that India's biggest strength is its domestic demand and, of course, the domestic consumption story that's playing out. So do hope the finance minister to address that. But in your view, what are the top 3 priorities that you'd expect the government to address?
Sorry, Sumita, could you please repeat this for me?
Right. I'm saying, what are your top 3 priorities as part of the startup ecosystem that you're expecting the government, the finance minister, to address in the upcoming budget?
The agenda from me, from the startup
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we seem to have lost that connection with Ashish Fafadia. He's going to be joining us in a short while from now. Of course, we were having this discussion with him on what the top priorities of the startup ecosystem, the VC ecosystem, are going to be in the upcoming union budget, which is all set to happen on Feb 1. And I'm told that Mr. Fafadia is back. Ashish, I believe that you're back on the line. I was asking you about the top 3 priorities that you have as part of... All right, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and sorry for the connection. So the 3 big areas of priorities for us in the investment ecosystem. Number 1, give a impetus to the funding in the ecosystem. We continue to be depending heavily on foreign sources of capital. We need to widen the base of capital in our own economy, and we have the potential to do that through the capital that is locked up in the insurance ecosystem, which is a long-term asset ecosystem, which has a significant ALM mismatch. The second avenue for the same agenda is the balances lying in the pension funds, etc. Very tiny percentage can really open up a massive opportunity. And the third avenue continues to be clarity of the policies around the extent to which the banks can participate. These three would give a shot in the arm to the widening base of the funding. The second part of the wish list is going to be a stable structure for taxation on capital gains for fund managers, GST on fees and income of the fund managers. And the third avenue is going to be to have the structure around the gift city and the IFSC, where they are going to, they should enable a structure which will be at par with international standards and enable fund managers to operate from that lens, where you can have a clarity and a say regime where there is complete clarity for the next decade plus plus. So these are the three big things which the ecosystem will benefit from. They have done a fair bit, and there is this scope for adding these last big slew of reforms, and we are set for the next decade.
Absolutely, Ashish. And we've been having conversations with industry stakeholders on what their budget expectations are. And of course, creating pools of domestic capital so that reliance on foreign money can be lessened is one of the top asks. So when you say that you're seeking clarity or clarity on whether banks can participate, you're asking for a structure around Gift City. Help us understand what are these? If these actually get implemented, what kind of a change will these bring about overall in the startup funding ecosystem and how the system operates?
Sure. So when we talk about the overall ecosystem, you do observe that today there is going to be roughly about an 85-15 or 80-20 breakup between global capital flowing into India in the private ecosystem and about a 15-20% domestic corpus. When you look at the gift city as an avenue, there is a big opportunity there where you create a structure which is slightly different from what the structure we have. Today, we have the AIF structure, which is governed by the SEBI. And globally, in countries like Singapore, there are structures which have much more stable opportunities, which are customized to the needs of the venture capital ecosystem. These structures enable for venture capitalists to pool global capital, seamlessly flow to the capital in India. Today, we have enabling structures which are a replica of what the SEBI permits, but there are still tax uncertainties on how capital gains of the fund managers will be taxed. And that does create a fair bit of uncertainty in the minds of both the investors who are investing in these funds and the fund managers who are going to be managing these funds. So having a stable structure dedicated for venture capital and private equity at par with what happens globally is what the industry is expecting as a demand. That structure is called a CVC structure globally as well, and there is a precedent for that. So it's not that we need to reinvent the wheel.
Right, and we do hope that the finance minister is listening to some of the suggestions that you're making. But on the point of reverse flipping, Ashish, because that's also been one big demand which has been around for quite some time now, on how the flip back to India for Indian startups could be eased. Do you think the government would look at this aspect with priority?
In as much as I do feel that this should be looked in with a very high degree of seriousness, given what we have been hearing over the last few weeks and the conversations the way they have been, I'm not very sure about the fact that this will be looked into. There are clearly there is a case in point where the companies have domiciled outside because that is how the ecosystem was placed back then when these companies were incorporated. And partly, I would even go on to the extent of saying that there was bad advice. It was not that the founders were fully clued in on what some of these positions will lead them to. So I think there has to be via media in which some of those things can be corrected. And to go down the path of putting taxes on them in a hefty portions will make some of those dead on arrival. We have a good, flourishing ecosystem. And that will make sure that if you're going to make it congenial for companies to flip back, there is going to be tax opportunity for the government anyway, eventually. So why are we rushing into it? But having said that, I am not too hopeful of that. I'll be pleasantly surprised and welcoming it with open arms if we pull that off.
Okay, and what about easing of ESOPs norms? Do you see that becoming more streamlined now?
Honestly, Sumita, that is the easiest one. And it has the quantum of the government tax laws really is nothing, because today people are not exercising stock options for the simple reason that there's a potential tax sword on their heads. So by allowing that, it really changes the feel good of the whole thing, and it is a right step forward. So I will definitely be keenly observing and looking forward to it. It'll be a disappointment if you don't pull that off, especially after the government did go to the extent of creating a fair bit of parity in the ecosystem with the capital gains tax last year. These are the three big things that we can do and we should consider.
More. So that is one aspect, and we do hope that the government is listening to it. But Ashish, let me also touch a bit upon this entire manufacturing ecosystem. And you also mentioned that during while answering the first question that I'd asked you. Now, manufacturing has been a big focus of the Indian government. There are PLI schemes for at least 14 sectors. But what more can be done to give a boost to manufacturing-based startups right here in India? Because I mean, we can't really just be reliant on PLI schemes, right? There has to be more which needs to be done if manufacturing has to become a significant portion of India's GDP. So what is it that the government could look at with respect to giving a boost to manufacturing is concerned? Because right now you not only just have China, you also have the Trump 2.0 administration, which is looking at building in America.
Absolutely. When you look at the overall ecosystem in the last 13 years, there have been three or four steps. We had the massive e-commerce boom back in 13, 14, 15, followed by a fair bit of interest around payments. And that's when the government came with the digital infrastructure. Just imagine the government not coming with the digital public goods infrastructure that it came, whether it's a UPI, whether it's a bunch of other measures that they have taken the last 5 years, that is going to, where all of these lead to a massive ecosystem. And to top it up, we had reforms around GST. We need something of that nature in with respect to the overall manufacturing as well, where the funds are going to be driven with the ability to invest in manufacturing ecosystems. They cannot do as swiftly as they would get into a tech ecosystem because these are much more capex intensive. So we will need to look at some of these measures where funds that invest into such funds that are supporting the manufacturing industry are going to be longer in duration. It facilitates in the creation of intellectual property and a measure of incentives around our own GST measures around it. So it's not about the PLI alone. It's about creating our own IP. It's about enabling long gestation funds. And it is also about giving the due tax holidays and concessions that make manufacturing convenient. The industry doesn't need tax exemptions anymore. The parity was needed, which we have. We don't need any further tax cuts. But we need the bit of incentives on propelling the manufacturing to the next level and building our own brands, building our own. And that's also on the intellectual property side with artificial intelligence and LLMs too. The same fundamentals should apply.
Right. So when you mention about building our own IPs, we do know that the government is now pushing for design, enhancing its design capabilities, especially as far as the electronics ecosystem is concerned. So we do hope
Yes.
that the government is listening to some of those suggestions with respect to manufacturing, and it ends up giving a further boost because now you have new age sectors like deep tech, for instance, coming up. Semiconductor is also shaping up in a big way globally. So one final question, Ashish, before we let you go. What is your hope on the overall new age, deep tech AI ecosystem? What kind of a boost is the industry expecting?
Without over exaggerating, I would like to highlight the fact that manufacturing, the way it was manifested 15 years ago, in terms of the only source of creating jobs versus today, is very different. Today, you can have only a handful of people, and you can have companies manufacturing a few hundreds of crores worth of goods from a small setup due to automation. AI provides that hope where we can overcome that challenge and that handicap can be overcome. So we have a massive opportunities around it. It's the government has been allocating funds seriously. We are reaching a time where a mega large announcement and allocation around those is going to be the key factor. Failing to do which, we will still end up missing one more sector. Manufacturing thrust came into India a little later than what happened in countries like China and few others. I very, very seriously urge the government that we should not be missing the AI and the software boom.
Absolutely, and that really is the hope that all of us here have, that AI, that post should not be missed. We don't know that, a corpus of over 10,000 crores was announced last year. We can only hope that the government is looking at only building on top of that, and of course hastily, because there are hectic developments happening globally with respect to AI, and now we are learning that Alibaba is also developing its own AI model, which it claims is going to be even better than a DeepSeek. On that note, thank you very much, Ashish, once again for joining us and sharing your valuable thoughts and giving us your valuable inputs on Startup Central right here on ET Now. And ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to step into a quick break, but lots more coming up on the other side. Don't go anywhere.